Um, all right, we'll jump right into it. So,
Okay.
am I right? This is just finished year 20,
Year 21.
year 21.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. And so, just going all the way back. So prior to it, right? Like what I remember, you coached in college before
Mhm.
you ended up at Frederick Gunn, and I'm going to be good about not calling it Gunner. We'll talk a little bit about that. But we're in college, coached briefly in college before Frederick Gunn, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I graduated from Wesleyan in '04
Yep.
and went and coached at Williams with Bill Kangas for a
Yeah.
year. And it was a great experience, having learning from him. I was actually his first full-time assistant coach. He had a
Right.
guy prior who was, he lived down in about 45 minutes away, had a full-time job. Older guy, would drive
Yeah.
up when he could. And so it was a great experience. It just wasn't like a long-term fit
Yeah.
for me, and what I
Right.
wanted to do. And so it worked out because I left. And then a year or two later, he got Dan Muse to come and
Yep.
coach.
Yep. Good for him.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so, but you were not a prep school kid. Didn't go to prep school, did you?
So I did. I went to public high school for four
Right.
years in upstate New York, and then I did a PG year at
Oh, got
Willis.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I was there for one
Yep.
year, which was also a great experience. And kind of I'm from Clinton, New York,
Yeah.
where Hamilton College is,
Up by
and
my Colgate. Well, that's of my old
I
neck of the
know.
woods up there.
Yep,
Yep.
yep. And so we were good family friends with Phil Grady, who was the head coach at Hamilton College for
Sure.
35 years. And kind of he steered me towards the prep school route, the PG route. And then he actually kind of steered me towards the Williams job later on.
Yeah.
I worked his summer hockey camps for probably 6 or 7 years growing up. And so kind of he took me under his wing in terms of that, and was a real helpful connection for me in terms of getting into this world.
Yeah. So did you, when you were like coming out of college, did you think you wanted to coach? Was that something you had thought about? Like I knew for me, I had no idea. I graduated, I think maybe a year before, same idea. Like I had no idea. I wasn't good enough to keep playing,
Right.
but I knew I wanted to like, figure out a way. And so I started thinking about coaching and having had a prep experience. Like, I don't know, I sort of gravitated back towards that relatively quickly. Had you thought like, hey, I want to coach and maybe prep school was something I wanted to do?
I thought about it. Like it was
Yeah.
always something, after my experience at Williston, it was always something that I thought I might want to do, and just kind of the lifestyle of it. And I had a couple of interviews my senior year at prep schools. Um, you know, didn't work out, and kind of graduated without like a clear sense as to what I
Yep.
wanted to do. And it was over the summer where the Williams job, that opportunity kind of popped up, um, and and just kind of honestly jumped at it because it was
Yep.
interesting. I liked Kangas when we went and interviewed, but like it wasn't like I didn't set out for it. It just kind of happened, and through that year, I really like enjoyed the coaching piece. I enjoyed the recruiting piece, but I also came to quickly realize like the college path
Yeah.
wasn't really what I wanted to do. I had a couple of, I could have stayed at Williams again, had a couple of opportunities for D1 volunteer assistant jobs. And just kind of looking at the long path of that, like it just didn't really appeal to me. And I again kind of applied to a couple of different prep school jobs, and connected with Chris Baudo, who was here at Gunn at the
Yeah.
time, who I had known because we had worked at the Hamilton hockey camps together
Oh
when I
yeah.
was in high school. And so we reconnected, and I basically kind of asking him in terms of if he had heard of other jobs that were open. And he was like, well, actually, we've got some openings here. So why don't you guys come interview? And my girlfriend,
Yeah.
now my wife at the time, we both came down and interviewed. And they offered us both jobs, which became kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah. And then did you work with Chris for I'm trying to think because that was I started I was at Berkshire in 03 or 04 and then I remember would have been like yeah 05 06 right
Yeah,
like so
yeah.
um
We coached together for 10 years.
yeah
Yeah, and my first 10 years, we had a consistent staff. It was, Chris was the head coach, and then Pete Whitney,
yeah
who went on to become the head coach, the first head coach at Post,
yeah
and myself. We were together for 10 years, and then they, kind of their opportunities to move on both kind of happened at the same time. Um, and so I became the head coach at that point, which was 15, 16, so 11 years ago.
yeah okay yeah and I remember and we'll get into like the hockey piece of this right like for the like that stretch and your program now still strong like those I like just dominant programs for years like when I was
Yeah.
coaching at Berkshire we always had played you guys that last game of the season and
Yep.
for us we were always sitting there going like hey I think we gotta win to get in or like this is and just sitting there and looking across the ice and being like and these guys are locked into the top of
Yeah.
the tournament here and haven't lost in 3 months
Yeah.
but I always think about for what's always amazed me about Frederick Gunn is that for a smaller school, like I don't, I'm trying to think, and I would say maybe like you, Kimball Union, right? Like those
Mhm.
smaller schools that have been able to maintain like that level of consistency and excellency, right? Like winning New England championships,
Yeah.
consistently making programs for now 20 plus years. Like it's a hard trick to pull off in a small school.
It is. It is. And I think, the interesting thing about it here was that like it wasn't done purposely.
Right.
It wasn't the head of school and others sitting down and being like, we want to have a really good boys hockey team. And in fact, like prior to like they were not good.
Right.
When Chris first got here, um, they had a year where they didn't win a game. They were kind of consistently, one, two, three, single digit win seasons.
Yep.
Um, and so when Chris took it over, he it was a real uphill battle the
Yep.
first couple of years. And my first year here was the first year that we were over 500 in like a decade.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of happened with Chris's vision and hard work and trying to bring in at first like the right kids and the kids who are going to be difference makers on the ice for sure, but also we're going to be a good fit at the school. Um, and it kind of built itself from there. And it certainly um, you know it, while we've been great on the ice and certainly hope for that to continue, the school's priority is still that off the ice piece. And if at any point, I were to start bringing in kids who weren't a good fit here, no matter how strong the program was on the ice, it wouldn't go over well. And so that still remains our priority.
Yeah, and I think in some ways to me what's almost more impressive about what you guys have done is I think people who know boarding schools and know schools, right, like they go through evolutions, right? Like and schools are different places and the profile of students you're going to be able to attract and attain and all of that is going to change over time. From the outside view, like it feels like to me in the work I do now, right? Like the profile of students now at Frederick Gunn is really different than it was
Mhm.
maybe in 03, 04, right? Like it feels like it has become more selective, maybe even significantly more selective, right? And um, but also it's really interesting and going back to that of like the school literally went through a kind of like a rebrand, right? And like
Yes.
I think I talked to you about this when we
Yeah.
spoke, right? Like it feels like to me it does have this different identity now as a school and academic programs and the facilities than what it was when you would have started there, right?
Oh, 100%. I think
Yeah.
that obviously the rebranding, the name change, or is kind of the public face of that.
Right.
But it's that change has really been happening over the 21 years. Going back to when Susie Graham was head of school and Tommy Adams was the director of admissions, and really they really kicked off that process. And going through the name change in 2020, you know, certainly gave us an even bigger leap in the market. And
Right.
there were years, and when I first started, I was a history teacher, so I wasn't as involved in the admissions process. But we had years back in like 2009 where we were scraping to get to like 275,
Yep.
and now of year over year consistent growth in the admissions process, record number of applications every year. We'll be at probably about 345 to start next school year, and that's a testament to kind of where the school has gone. And it's not 345 like we're just taking anyone who
Yeah.
comes through the door. It's 345, and we're able to be way more selective. We were full on April 10th this year, which is the first
It's
time that's
amazing.
ever happened. Yeah.
Well, and I will say this, like I think people who don't, if you're not in doing what we do in the admission side, right? Like I think understanding how this works and I say this to families all the time, like, look, schools, even the most selective schools, the idea that there are potentially opportunities for students in the summer months, like
Mhm.
that kind of always exists, right?
Yeah.
And you know what, I know I texted you last week
Yeah.
about a boy, and you're like, no, and I'm like, I can't I just know from what I do, there are not many now, like particularly small schools
Mhm.
like that. That are in that position. And so, I think for you as an admissions director, associate, you're sitting there going like, this is great.
Yeah.
But also there's some pros and cons to that as a coach, right? Like
For
it
sure.
makes
Yeah.
it, and I think that's going back to that first part of it, like maintaining consistency in a program and being competitive. I think now, not to say it was easier in
Mhm.
'03, but it was probably pretty different than when you first started and even first took over the program.
Oh yeah. In terms of especially summer admits, right? Like if
Right.
you had a higher end kid who for whatever reason decided over the summer, like, oh, maybe I'll look at prep school, like, there's pretty good chance you could make that happen.
Right.
Whereas now, there's there are still opportunities, but they're a lot tougher, and it's a lot more competitive, and the finances come into play, and everything is tougher from that end than it used to be. We're not a place where we kind of, and some schools do this, and every school has their own strategy when it comes to this type of stuff, but we're not a place that holds spots
Right.
over the summer months in terms of looking for recruited athletes or anything like that. We want to fill with the best kids that we can, when we can.
Yeah. Well, and I would imagine also, and I've seen this with the clients I have, both boys and girls who are now looking at Frederick Gunn. Um, particularly with boys hockey, I would imagine that for you, the challenge is you've got those really high-end hockey players who are going to be looking at you and Cushing and Avon and Salisbury and Kimball Union, right? Like I think you guys have established yourself in that, for lack of a better term, maybe that upper echelon of
Yeah.
competitive programs. But now I know for the students I have, you also have the really good players with really strong academic credentials who are going to look at, Frederick Gunn and Taft and Berkshire and Westminster and maybe Andover, and if they're going to look
Yeah.
at some larger schools too. And I would imagine for you now managing the yield and managing that recruiting pool is really different because again, I never worked in that office, but
Right.
having worked in admissions, I would imagine the second part of the overlap, as we call it, with those students is probably really different than it was for you 20 years ago.
Oh, 100%. And that, as you said, like managing the yield on it is the toughest part of
Right.
my job. And it's not just about the hockey piece, and not that it ever was strictly just about the hockey piece, but now more so than ever it's about finding those right kids where you know there's certainly pressures on me to, yeah, like we want to be competitive and we want to have a good team, but also like you know trying to yield some of those kids away from a choke
Right.
or from a Taft or an Exeter, and that what that means for the school is a big part of what I need to do as well, and get those higher end academic kids, those kids who are going to be leaders, prefects on campus, um, is is a real key component of the recruiting piece here now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think about too, like all that you guys have done in terms of the facilities and the academic programs and the growth
Mhm.
of that. Makes it like I've seen it with so many of my kids that we've talked about in the last
Yeah,
couple of years of their list of, as you said, if they're going to look at just small schools, it's going to be Frederick Gunn and
yeah,
Berkshire and Westminster and St. George's and that group of schools. But now you also have the kids that want to look at, I want sort of really strong smaller schools and larger schools, and now Choate and those places. And I've been on campus, I think twice in the last 2 years, what you guys have done with your facilities and your programs, I get it, right? Like I can
yeah.
see why kids want that.
Yeah, and that's and it's not just on the hockey front; it's across the board where those families that really want that small school experience, as you said, like we're consistently on the list with the St. George's and the St. Mark's, um, whereas that was never the case before. And there are geographic reasons for that, obviously, right? But you know, we cross over with those schools all the time now, and the when families are going to look at a bigger school as well, like it's Hotchkiss.
Right.
It's the 10 schools. And there was a time where we would be on that list maybe, but we'd be on it as a true kind of safety
Yeah, yeah.
option for families, for lack of a better term. But now, like we we're actually under consideration for a lot of those
Yep.
families, and they get in and they come to revisit day, and it's not a brush off, and they some will choose to come here, some will choose to go elsewhere, but I think we are viewed by them as a legitimate option for their child, which 20 years ago wasn't necessarily the case.
Yeah. So I guess in that, like you said, when you're trying to match now all of these pieces, right? Like they've got to meet these academic standards, they've got to have high character, they've got to want to be a part of, like you can't in a school like that size, right? You can't hide, right? Like you
Right.
have to be active and a part of lots of things, and it can't just be about hockey.
Right.
Um, like how have you been able, or how do you think you've been able to maintain that level of consistency? Because I always see that, like, I think with other schools of your size, you see, I think maybe more ebbs and flows than your program has had, right? Where you'll see a
Mhm.
school that'll make a run into the Elite Eight, and then maybe they drop the next year into the small school tournament, and then
Yeah.
it's going to be 3 or 4 years before their team's back. And like,
Yeah.
I feel like for you guys, I don't see that dip as much, right?
Yeah. 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 I think it's it's hard. It's getting
Hmm.
harder. 20 years ago, and our schedule has changed a little bit, but not significantly. Kind of the bulk of our schedule remains what it's always been. But we had, 20 years ago, there were teams that you'd play and you beat them,
Right,
12, 15, nothing. And we weren't at that point, like we weren't Avon. We
right.
weren't a powerhouse. Um, and that doesn't happen anymore. I think there's lots of talk about prep hockey and the state of it and all of that. I think one thing for sure is that it's deeper than it ever has been,
For
and
sure.
every program recruits now. Like it doesn't across the board. Every team recruits, and
Yep.
that certainly has not always been the case. And so, maintaining a competitive program in an environment where every team is actively recruiting has gotten harder. And I think, you know, the the talent pool ebbs and flows, right? I think that there are years where there are a lot of higher end kids. There are years where it's hard to find higher end kids. And what we focus on here is the team concept. We really try to build a team throughout our recruiting process. We're not looking for just the best players we can. We want to build an entire lineup. We want to build an entire team of kids. And to me, that's how you find success in prep hockey. Is you have to be able to have a team of four lines that you can roll, that you can deal with the ebbs and flows of the season. This year in February, we played 3 games every week in February.
Yep.
And that's coming through the heart of flu season and injuries. And you need that depth, and you need to be able to roll your guys. We don't want a first line that is, markedly better than your fourth line. Like we want parity throughout the lineup.
Yeah, well, and I think to that point around consistency, I talk to families a lot about, I think, the state of prep hockey, which we'll get into more here, but like I often tell families, and I think players, they don't necessarily recognize that, I have a lot of kids who are playing, like, say, U14, I think it's getting younger, maybe U14 or U15 AAA, and they're playing for really good programs. And then it's like, well, then the next natural progression for me is prep school, and then whatever I'm going to do after that, without fully recognizing that that's not like a one-level jump, right? Like you're going from, U14, U15, maybe even U16 AAA to now, in my opinion, right, like arguably the highest U19 AAA level that exists in the country.
Yeah.
And that, I think, progression, which I've always said, I think for you guys, I've seen this, right? Like taking younger students, I had a true ninth grader who's there, right? Taking younger students and giving them time to develop. That feels like it's changed for me maybe in the last 20 years in a way that didn't exist. But I think also for families and players, recognizing like there's a level of patience they're going to need that they don't always have, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they don't, especially in 2026, society in general isn't patient. People want what they want now. And younger guys, and there are exceptions to the rule, right? Like there are kids who are studs, and those kids are going to be able to make that jump to prep, and then they're probably from there, they're off to the NTDP or USHL guys, but they're not the norm. And you're right in that 15, 20 years ago, like no one was taking a freshman at all. But that also wasn't where the market was either, right? Like the market, I think in general, has gotten younger. And so there's more time, there's more ability on our end to take a couple of those younger kids, progress them along in hopes that they become kind of the guys down the road. But, there's still not enough of those guys, right? And you can't bring in a whole team of those guys.
Right.
And so you're still bringing in some older guys to build around that. Which is a different dynamic, right? Like it's harder. You don't want to reinvent the wheel every year. You don't want to bring in an entire new roster every year, but trying to then figure out the ways to progress those guys up, be able to slot them in a good spot in the lineup, and then bring in the right pieces to fill in around them adds a whole new layer to your recruiting, which is in part makes it easier, because you do have some of those younger guys who you can bring up. In other ways, makes it a little bit tougher.
Yeah. Well, and I think, for me, I see, as you mentioned, like I think it's getting younger for lots of factors we can get into. And I think some of the unknown, right? Like with what these changes to college hockey are going to be and things like that. But also now, as you mentioned earlier, right? Like I think as your admissions process becomes more selective, and I talk to families a lot about this, right? Like, well, now the largest entry point is going to be in ninth grade, right? And like the number of ninth graders that you guys are admitting, exponentially, right, or whatever it is multiple factors higher than the number of 11th graders you guys are
Yes.
going to admit and enroll, right? And I think so for some families, it is really understanding that idea of like, hey, just waiting for the moment where you think you're going to be able to step in and play 18 minutes a night at Frederick Gunn, like, all right, well, maybe that is a year from now, but like, you may not get in a year from now, right? Like, so
Right.
coming in and having a level of patience and understanding that, I think I feel like that's of greater import now for families maybe than it's ever been because the crazy thing I think from this is like at least going through this last admission cycle, it feels like more schools are becoming more selective, which I think is a great
Right.
thing, but like
Yes.
it also creates some challenge from the athletic piece of it.
100%. I think you know, I go through this with my guys in the college process too, right?
Right.
Where maybe they think they're a Division 1 player, they have a Division 3 opportunity, and it's like, do I take it? Do I not? And trying to get them to see what the landscape looks like, and how to, if you have an opportunity now, well, that opportunity may not come up again. And it's the same thing in our world where, if we have a spot for a kid now, great. If they say no, that's okay,
Right.
but there's just no guarantee as to what it looks like from the admissions process, no guarantee as to what it looks like from the roster process either. The the ability to, from our end of not being able to promise things year or two out is also really good.
Yeah. Yep.
It means we're healthy, right? It means that, you know, that we feel good about what our future looks like here as well, which, it's hard for families to understand, and hard for them to grapple with. You hear a lot, well, if they want you now, they'll certainly want you next year. And that's doesn't mean we
From
don't
high,
want. Yeah.
and from a hockey standpoint,
Yeah.
while that might be true, it
Right.
doesn't mean, I always tell people that I think that the biggest misconception people have about this process is that it mirrors the college process. And even for someone like you who works in the admission office, I tell people all the time, like, look, you can't walk into your director of admission and be like, hey, this kid's going to help us win 4 more games next year,
Right.
so we have to take him. Like, that rarely factors into the conversation. And so ultimately, really understanding the process. And yeah, and I think that may like that to me has changed significantly. And I even feel like it's changed in maybe the last 4 or 5 years in a way that wasn't true certainly 10 or 15 years ago
Right.
of like, hey, take the opportunity when it's there, and it might require a level of patience
Yeah.
for a year, as opposed to like, well, we're just going to wait till he can step in and play. He's in the top 4D, or he's going to be, definitely or close to Garrett somewhere in the top 9 forwards, right?
Well, that's, especially for families who are applying for financial aid, right?
Right,
Because, that's the financial aid pool is even a different pool, right? In
right.
terms of, it's even more competitive. Schools have limited amounts of financial aid dollars, and if they can make it work in year one, like, that's an opportunity that you probably don't want to say no to,
Yep.
because the following year, especially schools like ours, if it's getting more and more competitive, it means that pool is also getting more and more competitive. And being able to receive financial aid in one year, certainly doesn't mean that it's going to happen in that next cycle, because you don't know what that next cycle looks like, and the people you're competing with for those financial aid resources may be even stronger. And we may have different needs as a school at that point too.
Yeah, and I don't know, but people are always a little bit shocked when I tell them that about financial aid. Obviously, I don't know specifically what your numbers are, but like when I was doing it at Berkshire, it was probably in a given year, right, for us, 70 more somewhere between 60 and 70% of our total financial aid allocation was going to go into that ninth grade class, right? So
Right.
as you said,
Yeah.
like the more you're going to wait, the harder it's going to get not only to get admitted, but like I would sit there all the time as a director of financial aid and just be like, yeah, it's too bad they did. It's too bad they
Right.
waited, right? Because like we just don't have the money for them. We don't have that money allocated to our 10th or 11th grade in the way we do for our ninth grade. And like, are you feeling like also beyond, I think the admissions and the financial aid factors, like the changing hockey landscape, right, with what's going on with these changes in the NCAA and, maybe, the shifts now in USA Hockey and what their new establishment, like, um, you feel like it's going to continue to get younger. It feels that way to me, right? Like I
Yeah.
have more ninth graders looking.
Yeah.
Do you feel like have you started to see it even more over the last couple of years?
I think so. I think that the landscape has changed. I think it's changing as we
Right.
speak. I think getting younger. I think that people are. I think you're going to see more Canadians as well. Ironically,
Yeah.
and we certainly have the last couple of years. But with the 5 for 5 rule, and coming on the heels of the CHL agreement of a couple years ago. As a prep coach, you kind of think worst case scenario, right? Like these are going to be bad for us. And I actually think that both are actually maybe good for us.
I agree.
The CHL piece opened up, for the NCAA, opened up a whole new group of kids, but I think it actually opened up a whole new group of kids for us as well. And that
Yep.
with that ruling, I think junior leagues got a little bit older, and especially the major junior leagues with
Yeah.
more Americans coming in. That a lot of those Canadian kids now realized, well, one, I can do both. I can go major, junior, and college, which means I need to get my academics, set
Yep.
prior to heading off to major, junior. Maybe I'll look at prep school. But the other piece that went into it is those leagues get older, and now those kids need a place to play in the interim. And
Right.
we're kind of the only option out there that offers the best of both worlds in terms of the academics and the athletic side of things. When the 5 for 5 first kind of started rumbling, was like, well, now this is going to force junior leagues to go younger, and that's
Right.
going to pull, from prep school and force more and more kids to kind of leave early. And but now kind of looking what that rule may actually look like, and you never know until it's signed. But with that, the likeliness of it being the school year after you turn 19, I think actually continues to push more kids to prep school.
I agree.
And yes, younger, because maybe fewer kids reclass. But if they're
Yep.
if they're not going to reclass, that's going to mean they're going to want to come younger, because most families aren't looking at this as a 1 year transactional type of thing. The families that are looking here get the bigger picture of what our schools offer. They want their kids in this environment for multiple years, and so in order to get that, they're going to have to come younger. And I think that the USA Hockey changes, we'll see in terms of how that shakes out. But I think the NCAA is getting harder and harder to achieve. To be able to play NCAA hockey is harder and harder to achieve year in and year out. And that piece, I think, also is pushing more and more families towards the education that our schools offer, as opposed to either the academy model or the AAA model, where kids are having to bill it and do online classes. I think that's becoming less and less appealing.
Yeah, well, I think it's so interesting in the sense of I think you're right. The NCAA rule as it's been amended today, right, which looks like the way it goes, right?
Yeah.
I think in some ways, I think it is going to create more questions potentially around reclassing and things like that. But I do think in some ways you're going to see more and more of it back to what it was when you and I first started coaching prep hockey, of like kids playing prep hockey for 3 or 4 years, doing a year of junior hockey, then
Yes.
going to play college hockey,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I'm still not necessarily convinced ultimately that college programs are going to want guys for 5 years, right? Like, I think it's
No, I
intellectual.
fully agree. And I think that, now for kids, if they come to prep and they don't reclass, but they still do their 3 or 4 years in prep, graduate, they could still play 2 years of junior hockey, most of them, depending on,
Right.
when their date falls, and still enter college with 4 years of
4 years of
eligibility.
eligibility.
And for
Right.
me, I think that's the key. Like the 5 years, you know, I don't think that's going to be a huge draw for coaches, but also like you played college hockey. I played college hockey. Like by the time you get through 4 years, like a lot of guys are ready to move on too. And in that 5th year, a lot of guys
Well,
maybe aren't even going to be interested in that.
well, and I also think about it as a coach, right? Like if you're sitting there and going like, hey, I've got this guy who's, particularly at the Division 1 level, which is like
Mm-hmm.
where this impacts, right?
Yeah.
Like I've got this guy who's played for us for 4 years, and like his best option to continue to play at a high level is for him to come back here next year.
Yeah.
I think a lot of coaches are going to look at that and go like, there's probably someone in the pipeline here and recruit like who impacts our program in a way that's really different. And then I think for on the other end of it, you're going to see guys who um, go to division, do really well, and at the end of 3 or 4 years are going to be ready to make that next jump. I also think too, you're right. Like I have a friend who his son's a very good player in Canada who in recognizing, is for whatever it's worth at his age, right, on track to be on that Division 1 thing.
Yeah.
He's sitting there looking at it going like, look, with so few college opportunities, right? There's now 59 Division 1 teams. If he doesn't make sure, if he doesn't go the prep route, right? Potentially now a lot of those schools, the ECAC and whatever it is, can't recruit or may
Right.
not be able to recruit him. So like
Yeah.
in speaking with him, he was like, hey, I think he needs to do prep school and then play this year of major junior. And then like I talked to last week, I talked to Rob O'Gara, who just got hired at
Yeah.
Taft, and he was telling me that like, with these online classes, at those schools, they were like, we just cannot recruit a
Yeah.
kid who's done more than 2 years. Like,
Yeah.
so if you've done more than a year in those online classes, like those schools just aren't even going to touch you. So
No,
like, I think there's more options. I also think with the USA Hockey changes in both what we would call traditional markets like New England
yeah.
or even some of these emerging markets, you're going to have a lot of very good players who now may not be able to get onto one of those
Right.
whatever their team is, who now are going to be forced with this decision of like, am I going to play quote unquote tier 2, or can I go to
Yeah.
Frederick Gunn, play high level prep and this? And so like I think all of it is, I think all of it strengthens the league, but I think for, the audience we're talking to in this, right? Like also it's going to make it harder, right? Like, and I
Oh yeah,
think it's
100%. Make
why
it way
looking at preps earlier
Yeah.
is going to be the way you have to go.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and like you said, like there's 59 Division 1 teams, but and I think this is only going to be enhanced moving forward as you get more and more NIL and things like that. Like there's 59 Division 1 teams. If you're not an NHL draft pick,
right.
like 15 of those are out of reach for you.
For sure.
If you're not a first couple round guy, like good luck at going to any of those Big Ten schools, right? Like
Right.
that's for the elite of the elite. And then you got to try to find, okay, well, where can I slot if I'm going to be a Division 1 guy? Where can I slot? And as you said, like, well, a lot of those ECAC schools are really strong academically.
Yep.
Some of the Atlantic League teams are very strong academically, and if you don't have that piece in place, you've gone from you're not a first rounder, so you've gone from 59 D1s to 45.
40. Yeah.
If the academics aren't there, now you've gone from 40 to 45 to 20.
Right.
And of those teams, now how many of them have opted into the congressional agreement that limits their rosters to 26 guys?
26. Yep.
Yeah. And so, the number of available spots drops off dramatically. And then, okay, well, let's look at D3s. Like, the NESCACs, I think it's hard to get to an Ivy as a a hockey player, like good luck with a NESCAC, right? Like it's even
Yep.
harder. And
Yep.
so the academic piece is becoming more and more important as college hockey gets better and better and better. And, you know, also, I talk to our guys about this all the time. Like, okay, like you're good enough to be recruited, but are you good enough to be, are you good enough of a student to fit where they see you in their recruiting pool?
Yep.
If you're not their top guy, if you're not their in terms of, NESCAC terms, if you're not good enough to be their C band guy, then you better have the grades to be an A
Yeah.
band, B band.
Right. Like, what's your asset, right? Like,
Yes.
and if
Yep.
academically you're strong enough that in recruiting you, that helps them get another guy. Like, now you're an asset versus like if you're going to be the guy who needs help getting in, like, hey, you better be like the expectations are just different, right?
And
Like,
an era of smaller rosters in the D1 world, like if you're going to be good enough to be on that roster, well, you're probably still going to have, you're probably going to play, or at least you're going
right,
to get the opportunity to play. Like you're not just a body just to get somebody else in the door. You still have to be good enough, but there are a lot of guys who are good enough.
right,
And the hockey pool is deeper than it's ever been before. And how are you going to be able to pull yourself out of that pool? Or as I tell our guys, I say there's a funnel, and every step of the way, that funnel gets narrower and guys fall out of the funnel. And it should be your goal to just stay in that funnel as long as you possibly can. And the academic side of it is a good way to help keep yourself in that funnel.
right. Well, and one of the knocks used to be, right, is, I think sort of the limited season lack of development opportunities in the fall at prep school, which like when you and I first started coaching in prep school, like I think there was a validity to that argument, right?
Yeah.
But now that is so different. So for you, I ask a lot of coaches because I get this question a lot, like what does the fall look like for typically for your guys?
Yeah. So our rink opens up on like September 15th.
Hmm.
So it's not open on day one, which I'm I'm okay with. I think when
Right.
kids first get here, they need to adjust to being here. They need to find their people. They need to be able to do all of
Yeah.
that. And so having a week or maybe two where there isn't ice is a good thing. But then on the 15th, like our guys are on the ice 4 nights a week during the week. They do their afternoon commitment, and then we have ice post dinner before study hall. So that 6:15 to 7:45 range.
Yep.
We do one night typically where we allow them to just do like a captain's practice type of thing. And then 3 nights we bring in an outside coach to run practice for them. And then on the weekends we play in the CEM league.
Yep.
So there's a game Saturday and a game Sunday. So, really starting September 15th, our guys are on the ice 6 days a week. And
Right.
then obviously 6 days a week into our season. And it's not only the quantity, but the quality is good. Our guys aren't going out there and just kind of playing shinny hockey. We have
Right.
outside coaches coming in, working with them, running a practice. CEM, they're playing against other prep teams. There's college coaches on the bench. It's a good developmental experience as well, which even up until a few years ago, even having fall ice, as you said, like it was kind of
Right.
ragtag. Guys would go out there, do their thing. They could be on the ice, but it wasn't the quality wasn't necessarily there. And I think what you find is once guys are here, they are shocked by how much ice they actually see. And for most of them will tell you that they're on the ice more here than they've ever been before in their life, coming from, kind of the more traditional higher level AAA programs.
Right. Well, and again, like beyond that, right, it is just like anything, it's about accessibility, right? And
Mhm.
so like the rink is there, like mom and dad don't have to drive you, like you can walk. And I think for a lot of families that I get that question a lot about number of games in the fall. And to me, like I think when looking at that, like what is a couple of months, so for your guys, like September until early
Mhm.
November, really focused on development and then stepping
Yeah.
into, a 35-ish game season in the winter where, you know, that as closely replicates college hockey as anything
Mhm.
else. Like, I say this all the time, like obviously I'm biased, but the idea of like, you know, as we talked about, like, hey, I always, my goal for the kids I work with, right, is like you want to put yourself in a position where you're potentially recruitable by every college program in the country. Right
Right.
now, like, are you good enough to play at all of them?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
going to be a different question.
Yeah.
But ultimately, to me, the one path right now that provides it is going to be the prep route, and the idea of like it impinging your development because of lack of accessibility to ice is,
Right.
no longer valid.
Well,
Um,
and development, it's ice for sure, and there are families that still they do get hung up on number of games, right? And they've kind of been programmed all along that playing 70 to
right,
80 games is the most important thing. Um, for those families, like you combine the 18 games the kids get in the fall with the 36 we play in the prep season. Well, you're getting 55 games. You
and
combine
quality games.
quality games, and I think what
Right,
what new guys in particular are shocked with is the the level of the quality and the intensity and how tired you are after every game, and what it feels like at the end of the season versus what you felt like at the end of every other season you've ever played.
right,
Um, but you also get, here, like you also get our sports performance coach. The rink is here, but also the weight room, the fitness center, the athletic training, like that type of stuff, especially as you get older, is becomes more important than
right.
what you're doing on the ice. Taking care of your body, getting stronger, getting quicker, all of those things happen off the ice more so than on the ice. And there aren't a lot of places that offer all of those things in the same way that you can at prep. And I think, when you hear a lot of the talk about why the NCAA perhaps has become, the stronger feeder to professional hockey leagues than major junior, a lot of it, what they talk about is the access to the strength training facilities and coaches that Division I college athletes have that other routes can't provide,
Yep.
and that what that does to help bring players along. Um, you know, we mirror that here as well, and again, going back to the on ice, because that's tangible to a lot of people.
Yeah.
We had a player here this year with us, who had been at a academy for a couple years prior to this, um, and he did well there. He's a good player. He came here, and what his mom said to me was, as you're talking to families from these other options, if you ever want me to speak to them, I can tell you that my son got more on ice time at Gunn this year than he ever did at his academy. He was
Yep.
able to find time in his schedule and faculty members who would go and kind of open the rink for him, and he'd be on the ice Friday mornings before class. He'd jump on the ice on a Tuesday during his off block, and where he had come from, that wasn't as much of an option for him as it was here.
Yep. Well, and I just continue to go back to that idea of like um I I still struggle with the idea that and there's good and bad and everything, right? And what
Yep.
all these academies are, and there's some new ones popping up, and
Yep.
let's see how that plays out, right? Like, because I don't know, but
Yep.
to me there's still a somewhat of an inherent risk of like academically, are you putting yourself in a position where every college in the country can recruit you?
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't know that that's necessarily true
Yep.
with some, maybe even most of
Yep.
those academy type programs.
Yep.
For you, have you seen, and I know it's changed dramatically from when you first started coaching, but um, with all of these changes, like, do you see the path for your guys leaving looking different? Like, I just was reading, I think it was 48 New England kids taken in the Quebec major junior draft, right? Which
Yeah,
for us was like not even an opportunity for
right.
kids when we first started in prep school. So have you started to see it shift a little bit for your guys? And I know it's still early of like what
Yeah,
their next step hockey wise will be.
it's still early. I mean, I think selfishly, I think it actually is a benefit, and it gives them more
Yeah,
options.
I
Uh,
agree.
and I think the harder piece is, what does everything else look like? And I think it's really just kind of a shift, right? Like you've got the CHL leagues, you've got the USHL, you've got the North American League, and those are kind of the options now. Whereas before
Right.
you had the USHL, then you had the North American, then you had the NCDC, and you had the EHL and maybe the BCHL. And I think the bigger question for me is, what do those other leagues start to look like now? What is
Yep.
the you know what does the BCHL look like? What does it become? Does the USHL change its model? They've got the
Yep.
standard player agreements now. Is there going to be some merging that goes on? The top end guys are the top end guys, and the
Right.
top end guys are always going to have options. You're going to, my top end guys are always going to have kind of a junior path that's kind of set out for them before they get to college. To me, the bigger question is what happens to the good player, not the
Right.
elite player, but the good player who is going to be able to play in college at some level. He's going to be a bubble Division I, Division III guy. What league does he go to? What
Yep.
is the right path for that kid to be able to play right away, where the competition's strong, and where that kid's going to get the exposure that he needs to be able to accomplish his goal of being recruited by a college hockey program.
Right.
And I don't really yet know what that is going to look like. It used to be, okay, well, the NCDC minimum, right? Like, and you can go there and be fine.
Right.
Now is it the North American League?
Right.
And the North American League is, obviously Rochester has folded for the year. What's going to happen with Maine? But now they've added Ogden. Like,
Right.
like
And they
it's
took
going
on some of those
yeah,
NCDC teams.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's
going out
Wild
there,
West.
like the North American League is still good hockey, but are you going to get the exposure if you're
Right.
going out there, right? Like, and especially now that, and I don't say this as a knock, more of a reality. Like the North American League is now kind of a predominantly Division III league,
Right.
and the majority of the Division III schools in the country are located in the Northeast,
Right.
and we don't have the recruiting budgets that Division I schools have. And so, how much exposure are you going to be able to get from those schools outside
Yep.
of the handful of showcases that they do throughout the year? And to me, that becomes the tougher piece, because if you're only getting seen a couple of times, you've got to be good.
It better be good. Yeah.
You can't have an off day, because
Right.
if you get an off day, you may not have another opportunity. And so
Yeah.
for me, that's the bigger question, is those kids who, as a prep coach, who I have to, actively help them, work with them to find that path, because they're not the elite guys where the path just presents itself.
Yep. Well, and I think I've even started to hear it a little bit like over the course of the last year, but even this summer, honestly, being around the rinks and in the language I hear from parents and kids, right? Like all of these changes to me, the one thing that is for sure is like what playing college hockey right now is harder than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Division III college hockey is going to be unbelievably
Unbelievable.
good.
I mean, you have to play, especially at the higher levels, and I'm not even talking Hobart, right? Like
Right.
if you're at Hobart, you're a Division I player, and it
Right.
just didn't work out for whatever reason. But even kind of that level down to the mid-level D3, if you're good enough to be recruited by those teams, you're a potential Division I player. Like
For sure.
you have to be a bubble Division I guy at worst to play good Division III college hockey now.
Yep. And I've heard that change where I think when we first started, right, it was prep school as the path to Division I hockey, and
Yeah.
I still hear that, but I think there has been this recognition now of like, look, the reality of having an opportunity to play college hockey would be awesome. And again, you go back to that idea of like, okay, at say 14 to 16 or 17, what's the thing that, okay, I'm gonna get a great education, I'm gonna graduate, I'm gonna be open to it. And all of these paths that like you just laid out, right? Whatever the next junior route for a kid might be, which none of us know, like
Right.
all of that becomes available in a way that like I think other options are just going to limit kids. And to me, that's where, kind of circling back to the beginning, for as selective as it's become for places like Frederick Gunn, like I think your pool's about to get maybe even deeper than it's ever been.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which is a good
Um,
problem
yeah.
for
No,
me.
it's great. Yeah. Great. Well, all right, that was awesome. So I like to try and keep it right at an hour.
Perfect.
That was dead at it. But no, thank you so much. I tell people this all the time when I talk about Frederick Gunn, like and talking about the school. I'm always like, look, you know, you're awesome, and I think the way you manage not just the hockey piece, but I know from the admission side, like in speaking with families and really valuing the whole experience of what kids are looking for, like I've always, there are coaches who handle that differently. And all of our conversations have always been about like, hey, is this a kid who wants this experience? Do they understand what our school is? Are they going to buy into all pieces of it? Can they help my hockey program? That's what we're going to do. So I've always kind of admired and respected the way you handle that. And I appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. I think I've always believed that, when we get the right kids, you're going to have a better team because of it.
Yeah.
Forget about talent. Like, kids just have to be talented enough, right? And there are a lot of kids who cross that threshold. And once you have the kids that are talented enough, having the right kids who want to be here, who buy into the overall experience, that actually becomes the differentiating factor, I think. And our best teams that we've had here are full of kids who've bought into the entire experience of Gunn and have thus represented us even better on the ice.
Yeah. Well, and anyone who looks, right? Like, as I said, just go back through what your hockey teams have looked like for the last 20 years. And like you guys have done, as I said, an incredible job of being able to consistently find that group in a way that, like, I know how hard it is, but I don't know that everyone like
Yeah.
recognizes how hard it is. So,
I appreciate it.
all right. Thanks. That was awesome.
Absolutely. All right. We'll
All
talk
righty.
soon.